This podcast is a quest for well-being, a quest for a meaningful life through the exploration of fundamental truth. Enlightening ideas, insights on physical, mental, and spiritual health. The inspiration is love. The aspiration is to awaken new ways of thinking that can lead us to a new way of being well. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Soul Healing Conversations.
Grief never ends, but it changes. It's a passage, not a place to stay. Grief is not a sign of weakness, nor a lack of faith. It is the price of love. Valeria Teles interviews Brian Hartzman, a grief coach and loss support life reentry practitioner. Brian is a grief coach, working with people struggling to find their footing in the strange new world they find themselves after experiencing the loss of something dear to them. By his late 30s, Brian had reached what felt like the definition of success. He was almost 20 years into a successful IT career, and although he was divorced, his second marriage was perfect, bolstered by the lessons he'd learned from his first marriage. He and his new wife had a great co-parenting relationship, raising his kids with his ex-wife, and their very modern family was thriving. This seemingly perfect world was challenged when his wife was diagnosed with cancer. While they remained strong through her 2 years of treatment, she ultimately succumbed to the cancer. By the time he was 40, Brian had been divorced and now widowed, adrift in a world that no longer felt safe or enjoyable. Feeling the need to hold it all together for his family and friends only served to further compound his grief and isolation. These experiences brought Brian the gift of grief. As Brian learned, one can either break down or break open. We break down when we hold on to the world that no longer exists for us, but breaking open allows us to thrive in any possibility. In breaking open, a sort of post-traumatic growth can happen as one sheds the ideas they held about how they knew the world and their life to be, and live free of much of the stress and angst of that way of being. Brian found peace and a new life through leaning into his grief and embracing the Buddhist concepts of presence and impermanence. He is now trained in grief coaching and as a death doula, and supports others as they struggle with grief and challenging life experiences. Caretaking, elder care, death of a loved one, or the ending of a significant chapter in one's life. He also founded a support group for widowers to commune with others who get it. He learned that men struggle differently with grief in our Western culture, and how they are expected to grieve, to be strong. The Widowers Group provides a safe place where that stereotype can temporarily be set aside. Brian lives and works in Seattle, supporting clients locally and remotely. Meet Brian at brianhartzman.com. Here's the interview with Brian Hartzman.
In your own words, who is Brian Hartzman?
That's an interesting question. I think if I'd been asked that 5 years ago, it would be a completely different answer. And that probably informs what the answer is now. I think Brian Hartzman is someone who's on this journey of discovery with everybody else. And I believe I'm here for a purpose to experience something. And I'm someone who's just trying to get through to whatever my finish line is and have that experience. I feel kind of almost like a cat. Like I've been had a number of 9 lives, and I think I kind of counted I'm on like life 5 by now, different iterations of me. So I think kind of my definition has become more fluid from there.
When you say I am on a journey of discovery, do you have any idea? Could you describe what are you trying to discover, or what are you aiming to, where you want to go from here forward?
My life the past few years has brought me more of a lot of Buddhist study and understanding. So I feel like my goal is reaching towards that kind of enlightenment of impermanence and presence, and just being present and accepting the world in my life as it is and the impermanence of it, and accepting it I feel like acceptance is one of those words that it can kind of have a resignation sound to it. And so I feel like my goal is to reach that acceptance without resignation and with compassion. But I recognize that if I ever get there, then that's Buddhahood. And I realize that, then you're done. And so I accept that I probably will never quite fully get there, but that's kind of the whole journey and part of being here is to experience and learn those lessons.
What makes you believe that you're not there already?
Because I have moments of weakness is the word coming to mind, but I don't think it's necessarily weakness. But I have moments where I'm just like, oh, yeah, okay, that was a very, I'm checking out today. Or, I'll have kind of a grief wave or a heart punch, and I'm just kind of like, all right, or I'll be cranky. And I'm just like, all right, this is what's happening today. So I'm clearly not there, because if I were fully unattached and in accepting impermanence and presence, then those things wouldn't affect me like they do. But I also really relish those experiences where I get to really feel.
To what you just said, what comes to me is that everything that we see in the world, nature itself, it seems so perfect, but imperfect at the same time. So it seems to me like it's not even realistic to want to get to a point where we don't feel the feelings anymore, the negative feelings per se, because that's the area that we struggle with, most of us.
I feel like that's where we learn and experience. I agree. I would not want to not experience things. I think it was Brene Brown who has said that you can't selectively numb, and so if you try to not feel things, then you don't experience things. You can't have love without pain, and vice versa. Can't have pain without love, really. And so I think, if you do try to not feel things, if that's your goal, you kind of miss out on a lot, I think. Whatever that end goal or end result is, I don't believe that I'm on a path to necessarily get to that place of pure enlightenment and acceptance. And I also don't believe there's any way that my human mind could even comprehend what that looks like.
Right.
And I'm really enjoying experiencing life.
When it comes to grief, what is another word? What other word would you use for grief as of today?
The first word that comes to my head is suffering. As I've explored my own grief and the grief of other people that I've both worked with and been in sessions with, I've learned that grief is really it's the loss of an expected future. There's a way that your life is going to be, and all of a sudden that disappears. And so there's a lot of suffering that comes with that, but I think a lot of that comes with the unease and how do I relate to this world now that is unfamiliar? It's not how it's supposed to be. And so it's suffering, but it's more than that, because it's that discomfort of being in an unfamiliar, scary world now.
So it seems to me like it might be the main component of suffering there is the expectation, this idea that life should be the way I planned, the way I believe it to be. And then when it doesn't really follow those rules, life itself doesn't follow our rules, then we become disappointed and broken, per se.
Yes, I think that's exactly what it is. But then I feel like that is the gift of grief, is once you recognize that you're still existing in the world that's not how it was supposed to be, and you can actually have happiness in that world, then all the other expectations that you've had about the world and how it can be can also start to go away and evaporate, and more possibility becomes open to you than you ever believed was there before.
The purpose of life, what do you think that is? Do you believe that we chose to be here and go through these challenging and difficult times?
Yeah, I do actually. That's something that I struggled with for a while after my wife died. I was trying to figure just that out. Was what was our not only what was the point of it all, but especially why was I now left behind with, half my life still ahead of me. And she wasn't. And what I did a bunch of reading and read some books. And one of the things that I came to is that, which works for me for now, and I realize it's different for everybody, but that we're here to learn something, and whether we get to do it multiple times or one time, I'll find out once I get to the other side. But I believe that we're here to experience something and learn something. We've chosen almost to experience and learn the things that we're here to learn. And one of the things that she was here to experience was the relationship and love that we had, and then also the process of dying in that relationship. And so therefore, and she was done. She was here, she learned what she needed to learn, and she was done. And clearly I'm not done yet. And so, and part of what I chose to experience was that pain and loss. And also, that became more okay and acceptable to me after I started to have my healing and growth out of it, and started to realize that while I'm not happy with what happened, that I'm not happy that she died, I'm not glad that she died or what we went through, I'm very grateful for the growth and learning that I've had as a result of that, and how I relate with the world now. And so it's kind of like, okay, then this makes sense. I'm here to learn something, and I'm clearly doing it.
This is something that you always believed in, sort of, before?
Not remotely. I was born and raised Presbyterian, Protestant, and growing up, I always questioned just the whole idea of like, well, if we go to heaven and live forever as prescribed by all the churches, that just sounded incredibly boring to me. And so it didn't make sense that was that was how it goes. But then the alternative to that was that we just die, everything ends, and this is all pointless, which also didn't sit well with me either. And I struggled with that for a long time. And actually, it took my wife dying for me to kind of get to that point of, oh, well, maybe we're here to learn and experience something. And either way, if there is another plane that we get to participate in after this, or even potentially before this, it's beyond our ability to comprehend what that is and looks like now. And so I just, and that's kind of where the acceptance starts coming in, is like, well, then I just, that's, chances are, even if I could know what it is, I couldn't comprehend it. So we just keep going. But I do believe that we're here to learn something, and that's only evolved in the last, I'd say, 6 years since my wife died.
It seems like it takes suffering for us to go deeper into these what we call wisdom or deep understandings or insights, enlightening insights. Do you also believe that it takes suffering to get there, or we can learn without suffering?
I would love to think that we can learn without suffering. And I think that kind of goes back to our earlier conversation about just that and experiencing versus not experiencing. And I have yet to come across anyone who's been able to really learn and get to those points of acceptance and compassion and understanding without going through some sort of suffering. And it's heartbreaking to realize that. And I've seen organizations try to do trainings and things to get you there. And I've seen some people come close, but I do. And especially as a parent, I've been so pleased with the growth that my kids have had since, and it was their stepmother, but since she died, and their experience with it and who they've become as a result of that. And it's really just kind of reinforced for me that, all I wanted to do was protect them from any sort of pain and suffering. But the thing that I could not protect them from has made them grow, even, into things that most people don't learn until late in adulthood, they now can impart to their friends.
So healing. Talk to me for a moment about the healing process, Brian, after the grieving healing process. What are some of the misconceptions about the healing journey?
I think the two biggest misconceptions that I've seen and observed, I think the first is the 5 stages of grief. Is that everyone kind of expects that they get to check off the 5 stages of grief and they'll be done. And not only is that not how it goes, it's more like a spectrum and a dartboard, and you get to each experience each hour, each day, depending on how far out you are, you get to experience a different stage of grief, but also that the 5 stages of grief were developed for dying people. And Kubler-Ross has even come and said that. She says, look, this is not for people who have survived, those who have died. This is not for grieving people. This is for people who are dying, which is why the last stage is acceptance, is you finally get to this point of, okay, it's coming and I have peace with it. For those of us who have survived, those who have died, or have gone through some traumatic event that puts us into grief, the beyond those 5 stages is figuring out how to exist in the new world that is presented outside of your grief, and that's, I think, where the healing really begins. The stages of grief help you express all the feelings and emotions that are kind of holding you down and making you suffer. And then after that, it's healing and learning how to exist in the new world.
Is that what you call it? Life reentry practice?
That is actually, life reentry. That is the primary, I guess, tenet of life reentry is that that you have an opportunity to create a new way of being in the world in front of you. And it kind of comes from it was created by a woman who was actually a grief therapist. And then when her husband died when he was 36, she realized that she really had no idea what she was doing until she actually experienced grief herself. Kind of like what we said, is we need to go through that. And so she did research into ways of growing out of your grief, and actually has done like MRI studies on the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala and your fight or flight responses. And essentially, with your fight or flight response, you retreat into this world where your logic brain shuts off and you're living in your emotions, and you do it because the world doesn't feel safe. Our biological predisposition for that comes from our earlier evolution. You're running away from a lion with your baby, and then you're safe, your amygdala releases and you go back to being logical, thinking human being. But when you have something so traumatic that affects you, the whole world doesn't feel safe anymore. And so how do your brain doesn't know to shut off that fear response. And so the life reentry is helping people find a way to recognize that this new world that is not what they thought it was or was going to be is a safe place. And not only that, but you can do things in this world that are even more than you ever thought you could do. And so really re-enter life and, go through, whichever of your 9 or 20 lives that you have, and start off on that until the next turn.
Is that also creating new belief systems or replacing them?
It's all the above. Right. Creating, not necessarily having to create new belief systems. I think it's almost inevitable that you create a new belief system, because everything that you knew was the world is no longer necessarily true. So I do think it is inevitable, or at least some molding or evolving of your belief systems. And in some of that belief systems is, I believed that and for me, for example, I believed that I had to follow my dad's path and work for one company for 30 years and retire, be a company man. I worked in IT and I wore a suit to work every day. And then after my wife died, that wasn't it anymore. And now I'm self-employed. I do have a couple of different vocations that I do, and it's not all like the world that I believed I had to live in is not that world anymore. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your spiritual belief systems. It's every belief system. Things that you knew were your world are no longer necessarily true.
I love that idea of questioning everything, coming from a place of curiosity, not really paranoia, which sometimes can happen to be part of it, part of that journey.
It can be very unsettling for a while. And that's part of, I think, the process is slowly finding, getting your feet on the ground, because it's very unsettling when your beliefs, and they're very comfortable, your beliefs. I mean, that's why even people in abusive relationships stay in abusive relationships, because it's what you know.
Do you also teach your clients, people that you come across, to become comfortable with the unknown, but also trying to be in that place as well, or practicing to be in a place of, I don't need to know?
Yes. And that is one of the things that I do try to work on people with. And sometimes it's, whether it's teaching, or sometimes I really try to help people discover that. I think it's really the best way of teaching. And I remember I had one client who was really struggling with staring at the unknown, and asked them to reflect on, they told me about something earlier in their life. And I said, okay, well, when you started this job and this person who was in your life later didn't even exist in your life at that point. And you had no intention of being with this person or even knowing them. And all of a sudden your life unfolded that way. And it wasn't completely, when you were 20, this was not your expectation of what your life was going to be like. And this is how it went. And it was wonderful. So once they remembered that, then it was, okay, I'm here again now. I'm at another place where what I expected the world to be isn't anymore. But I also, great things can come out of that. And part of that is helping people discover where this already happened in their lives. Because for most of us, it's happened multiple times. We didn't go become the astronaut that we wanted to be when we were 12. But we're, as a result, we've met the love of our life. So helping people discover that.
So you are a grief coach and a life reentry practitioner. You said something, the article you sent me, about the difference between breaking down and breaking open.
I've kind of found that with most people, we get to this breaking that happens to us when we encounter a traumatic loss or traumatic event that brings us grief, and there's a breaking that happens. And if we break down, we pretty much stop. I kind of view it as if there's a river and there's a big bend in the river. When we break down, it's we kind of just dig our heels in and have to fight against the current, and but kind of collapse and don't move anymore. And that's because clearly the world that we were in has ended. And the only way to continue on with that is to follow the river as it turns. But if we break down, we're stuck now. We don't get to go on and move on with our world anymore. And we're choosing essentially to stay in suffering at that point. But when we break open, which is, I think for most people, is almost inevitable. Sometimes we need help or guiding hands to get there, or get there more readily. But breaking open, we find that not only the shackles that are holding us in place in our grief and our suffering get to be released, but also everything that we've had before in our life get to break free as well. Where we break free of all those things, and it's a true breaking open, and it's. Your heart also breaks open. If your heart breaks down and you break down, it closes up and you're done. You can't let anything else in. You don't want to let anything else in. And it kind of goes back to that. You can't selectively numb. You stop loving, you stop feeling, you break down. But if you break open, which really I don't think you can ever stay the same after any sort of traumatic event. So when you break open, your heart also breaks open, and you now not only do you let more in, but you let more out, and it completely changes your way of being. And it's very uncomfortable at first, especially compassion can be uncomfortable at first, because there are ways that you know how to exist and expect things in life, and it can be uncomfortable, but it's a filling up and overflowing is really kind of what happens.
Well, what comes a lot to me listening to you is that everything is happening within. So all these ideas of breaking down, breaking open, breaking free, actually we're never broken. We're always whole. But then is the belief systems we have, because it's so, when we look at life itself, what's happening here, what this is, anything could happen, really, if we really stop to, not to think about it, but to reflect on life. You see that anything could happen. We could die at any moment, lose the body. Anyone around us could lose the body, or anything could happen, a heart attack, something. But we often don't think about that, or don't reflect about it. And we kind of paint or imagine this perfect reality where nothing really goes wrong. Not to us, right? We witness to other people break, all these things happening to other people, but we don't really reflect about that could happen to us. We don't reflect on these things. So do you also teach your clients to reflect on what could go wrong or on death itself?
I definitely encourage people to explore their feelings about death, but not so much trying to explore or figure out what could go wrong, because it's there's a in fact, like one of the biggest things that I teach, what my teacher who really helped get me on this path, he told the story where he was really suffering early in his life. He had a job that he hated. He couldn't get in a relationship, and his friend would say, "Don't worry, things will change." And then he later on he got a job that he didn't like, and he was still struggling with dating. And his friend says, "Don't worry, things will change." And then finally one day he was elated. He has a job that he loves, and he's in a relationship that, it's the perfect match for him. And he was just so exuberant. And his friend says, "Don't worry, things will change." And it was just so impactful that if, keeping that mindset of don't worry, things will change. It's not a matter of what could go wrong or what could go right. It's just things will change. And so it's really what I try to encourage people to contemplate is that when has this happened in your life? And it hasn't been scary because it's what has happened. And so can we really find a center in that place of things will change? And it's hard, especially because we get very comfortable and complacent with whatever is currently happening.
Right. If it is good, especially, if it is wonderful. Yeah.
But it is, and so really, and then it becomes everything is a practice in life, and even for me, I will get comfortable, and when things don't quite go the way that I've wanted them to go, then I have to be mindful and remind myself, okay, this is just this, and I can get upset about it, and that's perfectly, and that's one of the other big things I've learned out of my Buddhist training is self-judgment and trying to have some self-compassion, be like, okay, I'm upset right now, and that's okay. This is me worrying,
right?
And I'll feel better later. I just can't fixate on it.
I love that idea of the way you put it. It's very positive. So don't worry because things will change, good or bad. Yeah, that's a very wise place to be. Not expecting things to go our way.
Right. Well, and I do think that's where a lot of suffering can come from, is not necessarily suffering from when things go wrong, but suffering from everything is so right now. I really don't want things to be different. And I want things to stay this way. You get attached to that. It's especially the attachment from a good thing to a good thing can even bring more suffering than.
True. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So attachment is really the key message here, the non-attachment, actually.
Right. Which is, and and there's I think with everything, there's a balance. Can you have hope and aspirations without being attached necessarily to that outcome? I really want to get this job, or I really want to do this summer. And if you're really attached to that, then you can get disappointed. But you can still, if disappointed if it doesn't go exactly the way you wanted it to. But if you can have hope and attachment to, or hope to, I would like things to go this way, and then when things go sideways, it's going to be like, oh, okay, things are going this way now, and hopefully you can look back and be like, wow, I'm really glad things went that way. Whereas you couldn't even see that it was positive that things went a different way because you were so attached to that one, things working out one particular way.
Actually, speaking of attachment, there's a quote in one of your blog posts that I really liked. It says, "Grief never ends, but it changes. It is a passage, not a place to stay. Grief is not a sign of weakness, nor a lack of faith. It is the price of love."
Yes, I just got chills when you read that back to me. Especially because the grief it's the price of love, and I think that it's if you love truly and deeply, then it will hurt truly and deeply, but it's also it's exactly, it's the price of love.
Yeah. That is, to me, kind of, again, wisdom, maturity, maybe responsibility comes to mind, but also freedom. This idea that we can attach, that we have the freedom to attach, to love deeply, as you said, and be willing to pay the price and be okay with that. So if we can hold these two ideas, so if you can live this kind of life, then it's a gift, as you say, the gift of grief. So that's because we're always losing in life, aren't we?
Yeah. And that's one of the, I say it a lot, especially when I'm first talking with people about grief, is the word loss. But I learned actually through some of my death doula training to stop using the word loss. And it's one of the things I coach my people on doing is their words. And if we say loss, like I lost my wife, or I lost my dog, or I lost my job, it's I did this. And it's even though logically we know better, our emotional brain is still always very active and participating in the background, and it still feels like we did something. And so that's why, like, as I've been talking with you, I've never said I lost my wife. I said my wife died, because it happened and I didn't have anything to do with it. In fact, a lot of my suffering was me working my tail off to not let it happen. It was completely out of my control, but so it's, the word loss, I do try to coach people to start retraining themselves to not use that and just kind of state what happened.
I don't think we can prepare for these things anyway.
No, we can't. Everything that we can prepare for would be the one thing we didn't think of that happens. I remember sitting in my support group early on, and as I look around the room, everyone's checks in with why they were there and who died, and it's heart attack, avalanche, box truck, drunk driver. As you go around the room, like, we're all under 60 and all had somebody die through some completely unexpected thing that happened that wasn't supposed to happen. And for me, years of having that in my face really helped me see that it's, tomorrow is not promised to anybody. And unfortunately, most people don't want to recognize that. And that's part of the gift of grief, is you start living with today because you now experience that, it's anything can happen around the corner, both wonderful and horrible.
Is that brought you to a place of practicing gratitude more often, Brian, these days?
Yes, definitely. I have, and sometimes I don't even recognize that I'm having gratitude, and it's because it kind of shows up as, joy or appreciation. Like I said, with my kids, seeing them, and how they've grown out of this, I just have such a swelling of. It's almost more of a, this is why we're going through this, or this is this is why what we've gone through is okay. Because, yeah, so yeah, definitely gratitude and a lot of things. And I also say a lot of compassion. Because I've really start to, when I see someone who's struggling, or, we have a lot of street homeless out here in Seattle, and you see these people who are struggling. You might have, 10 years ago, I might have kind of cringed and like, oh, like that's gross, or, I don't want to be near that. And now when I see them, my first thought is, God, I wonder what they've gone through. I've been in moments where I've been walking down the street, talking to myself, having a flashback, and I'm sure I've looked crazy at times since this has happened. And so now when I see someone like that, my first thought is, oh, what has happened? That's, they've been through some stuff, as opposed to like thinking, like cringing and saying, oh, they've made bad decisions, or like, sure, they may have made bad decisions, but they've also probably had some really rough experiences that brought them there.
So we're almost at the end, and I do have a few more questions for you, the ending questions. But before that, Brian, I had so many other points here, not enough time. But I love what you said too in one of your blog posts. You say, I found a way to be happy within myself, confident, and without the need for someone else to bring me happiness. So that's the kind of responsibility that I think I spoke of earlier, like taking responsibility now for your own happiness, the way you feel and don't feel, or whatever comes. So that's a very, very, to me, enlightened place to be. If we can stay there, which is not a destination either. So it's okay to let other people to make you happy too. That's also, everything's included. But I do love this as a foundation. And yes, you want to make a comment?
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, just it's really, it's changed all of my relationships, both with, with my family, my parents, and then with, in dating after having the love of my life die. Change it. I now, how I relate to people, and what I don't put my happiness on someone else as their responsibility anymore. And so now it's, they just get to add to it, which makes life so much, and relationships to both, intimate and not intimate, makes relationships just so much easier when you're not putting that responsibility on somebody else. Rather, you just get to experience them.
Also, briefly, talk to me about the support group that you founded, and also how men experience grief differently than women.
Sure. Yeah. I noticed as I was going through my own support group that I was attending, men kept on dropping out. And then I'd done a little bit of research, or just books that I'd been reading. Someone talked about how men just have this box, at least in our culture, an expectation of, you're supposed to be strong and just never leave that box. Like the word cowboy up is a big term in our culture, just, be strong and power through. And one of the men who left the group that I would attend, he commented once, he said, Brian, I don't like having to talk about it, but I don't like being around people who don't get it. Which pretty much meant that his choice was to be alone, because you're surrounded, especially when you're in grief, whether you're a man or a woman, you're surrounded by people who don't get it. And they say either really dumb things, or they just disappear, or they expect you to be all better by now. But as a man, it's, we're taught very early on exactly how vulnerable we're allowed to be. And if you talk about your grief, that's just way too vulnerable and emasculating. So I kind of saw this void out there where, men aren't able to heal. And so I started this gathering really of men, and I struggled for what it should be and how to do it. And then I realized that the way that it could be most beneficial was to be the least. And so we get together once a month, and it's for widowers only. So that way you're with people who get it. You're not with people who don't get it, but you don't have to talk about it. We get together, we socialize. There's no checking in, talking about who you are and why you're there. It inevitably will come up. But for a lot of people, just hearing someone else talk about things reminds them of feelings that they haven't even confronted yet. And so it helps bring things out for people. And it's almost turned into a sort of fraternity. When we have a new guy show up who he's only a few months out, It's like, all right, let me just tell you what you're in for. This is what we get to go through. And then we get to talk about some things that's not as comfortable talking about with women in the room, talking about dating and what's that like and the in-betweens of, am I ready to date, or do I just want to have, some sort of connection. And dating is really difficult after your spouse has died. And so it's really, it's been great, and it's been going on for, I started that group before I even did my own training to be a grief coach, because it just, I didn't need anything special to get men together. And it's been going on now. We struggled a little bit during the pandemic, getting a bunch of guys to log into Zoom to hang out. It has been tough. But yeah, it's great. I'm really proud of it, and I'm proud of how the men have grown and been able to heal through it.
That sounds wonderful to me. I love how you put yourself in that position to help others just naturally. That's what comes across to me by listening to you, that you just wholeheartedly just give yourself to these beautiful purposes just to help others. Thank you, Brian, for being you. And I do have 2 more questions for you, the ending questions. If you knew you would die soon, meaning leaving the body, would you make any change or do anything in a different way?
I might work a little bit less. Especially like I don't do some of my grief coaching full time. I do some other stuff on the side. And so I might, just to help kind of balance out the checkbook, and I'd probably stop doing those things. So I could spend more time with the things that mean the most to me. But other than that, I remember years ago, I got to a point where I was like, I'm okay now. I'm good. I could go tomorrow. Like I really remember very clearly that moment of, I'm good. And so I don't think I would change a whole lot, because I finally got to that point of, I'm not living to, in the ways that I used to, the way that I believed I had to participate in society.
And my last question is, what are 3 things about life you know for sure as of this moment?
I know that life is unpredictable, and life is beautiful, and life is about connections.
Thank you so much again, Brian, for your presence, your wisdom, and your compassionate. It's really beautiful to see that. I'm always honored to not just talk to people like you, but share their messages, and which is we're all trying to do the same thing, kind of create a more peaceful reality, a more peaceful world. So thank you for that again.
Well, thank you for doing this, and thank you for hosting me.
And before we say goodbye, where can we find more information about you, your work, services, and future projects?
Everything is on my website, brianhartzman.com. And all my how I do and what I do is hosted there.
Thank you so much again, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye for now, Brian.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about Brian Hartzman and his work, please visit brianhartzman.com.
To learn more about this podcast, please visit fitforjoy.org/podcast. Thank you again for listening, and bye for now.